The dusty streets of Copper Ridge had seen their share of violence, but nothing like what was about to unfold. They say the quietest men carry the deadliest secrets, and Samuel Wheeler was about to prove just how true that could be. This is the story of how a gang of ruthless outlaws made the mistake of challenging the wrong drifter, a man whose gentle demeanor masked a past written in blood and gunsmoke. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the scorching desert sun dipped behind the rugged mountains, casting a blood-red glow across Copper Ridge's weathered buildings, Sam Wheeler sat motionless in his usual corner of the Silver Bell Saloon. His untouched glass of water had grown warm in the evening heat, but he didn't seem to notice. Other patrons crowded the bar, their raucous laughter and drunken tales filling the air with a fog of tobacco smoke and whiskey breath. Yet Sam remained apart from it all, his eyes downcast but vigilant, a habit carved deep by years he struggled daily to forget. Rose Martinez, who'd owned the Silver Bell since her husband's passing 3 years ago, had grown accustomed to Sam's peculiar ways over the past few months. Unlike the miners and cowboys who frequented her establishment, Sam never touched a drop of liquor, never joined the poker games, and somehow managed to fade into the background despite his impressive height and the deputy's badge that glinted on his vest. The evening had settled into its usual rhythm, when the first signs of trouble pushed through the batwing doors. 3 of Victor Blackwood's men stumbled in, already heavy with drink and the kind of meanness that often led to bloodshed. They'd been pushing their luck lately, testing the boundaries of Marshal Crawford's patience with increasingly bold disruptions. Few understood why Crawford had pinned a deputy's badge on such a quiet stranger 2 months ago, making him a lawman alongside the more outspoken Frank Miller. "Well, ain't this a fine establishment?" the tallest of Blackwood's men announced, swaggering toward the bar where Rose worked. His eyes carried a dangerous gleam as he reached across the counter, grabbing her wrist with calloused fingers. "How about some special treatment for Victor Blackwood's finest pretty lady?" Rose winced but kept her voice steady, years of dealing with troublemakers evident in her tone. "Let go of me now, or I'll have no choice but to call the marshal." The man's grip tightened as laughter erupted from his companions. "Marshal Crawford? That old fool knows better than to— Excuse me." Sam's soft voice somehow cut through the noise like a well-honed knife. He rose slowly from his corner, each movement deliberate and careful, as if he were handling something fragile. "The lady asked you to let go." The saloon fell silent as the 3 men turned, their bleary eyes finding the deputy's badge on Sam's chest. The one holding Rose's wrist let out a harsh bark of laughter that held no humor. "Well, would you look at that? Crawford's pet mute finally found his voice." Sam's gaze remained fixed on the floorboards, his hands hanging loose at his sides. "Please release her and leave." The saloon's closing. Or what? Another of Blackwood's men stepped forward, tobacco juice staining his unkempt beard. His hand came to rest on his holstered gun with practiced arrogance. "You gonna make us, deputy?" The moment stretched like pulled taffy until Tommy Hayes, the young deputy who often worked alongside Sam, burst through the saloon doors, his face flushed with urgency. "Sam, there's trouble." He froze, taking in the scene before him with widening eyes. What followed seemed to happen between heartbeats. The man holding Rose shoved her roughly aside and reached for his gun. Before the weapon cleared leather, Sam moved with a grace that seemed impossible for his size. Like water flowing around stones, he closed the distance. 3 precise strikes delivered with almost gentle precision sent the first man crashing to the floor, his unfired gun spinning across worn floorboards. The second man barely registered his companion's fall before Sam's elbow connected with the sweet spot beneath his jaw, dropping him into unconsciousness. The third attacker managed to squeeze off a shot, the sound deafening in the confined space. But Sam was no longer where he had been. Like a shadow slipping between lamplight, he appeared behind his would-be killer. A quick twist of the man's gun arm produced a sharp crack, followed by a howl of pain as the final assailant crumpled. The entire exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. Tommy remained frozen in the doorway, his mouth working soundlessly, while Rose pressed herself against the bar, clutching her bruised wrist. Sam had already returned to his corner, head bowed as if nothing had happened, though keen eyes might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he lifted his water glass. Marshal Crawford arrived minutes later, his spurs announcing his presence before he pushed through the doors. Deputy Frank Miller followed close behind, his hand never straying far from his gun belt. Crawford surveyed the groaning men on the floor with the practiced eye of a man who had seen his share of saloon brawls. "These Blackwoods boys?" Crawford asked, though the question seemed mere formality. Sam offered a single nod, still not meeting the marshal's gaze. Crawford's weathered face creased with satisfaction. "Good work, son. Frank, Tommy. Get these idiots over to the jail. Let them sleep it off." He turned his attention to Rose. "You all right, Miss Martinez?" "Yes, Marshal," Rose answered, though her eyes remained fixed on Sam's quiet form. "Thanks to your deputy here." Crawford pulled up a chair across from Sam, studying him with the kind of interest a man might show a new breed of rattlesnake. "You know, when you drifted into town 3 months back, barely speaking above a whisper, some folks thought I was touched in the head to offer you a badge. But I've been wearing this star long enough to recognize a man who knows how to handle himself." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Though I admit I've never seen anyone move quite the way you just did." Sam finally looked up, meeting Crawford's penetrating stare. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a warning. Crawford nodded slowly, then pushed back from the table. "Get some rest, Sam. Tomorrow's gonna be interesting. Blackwood ain't gonna like hearing his boys get handled by one deputy." Crawford adjusted his hat and headed for the door, pausing briefly. "The thing is, I don't much care what Blackwood likes. This is my town." His boots echoed on the wooden sidewalk as he disappeared into the gathering darkness. As night settled over Copper Ridge, Sam remained in his corner, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. Tomorrow would bring trouble. It always did when men like Blackwood felt their pride had been wounded. But for now, in this quiet moment, Sam allowed himself to remember why he had chosen this town, why he had accepted Crawford's offer of a badge. After 5 years of drifting, running from what he'd been, what he'd done, maybe he had finally found a place worth protecting, if only the past would stay where he'd left it. The following morning dawned harsh and unforgiving over Copper Ridge, the sun already burning away the night's chill, as Sam made his way to Marshal Crawford's office. Word of the incident at the Silver Bell had spread through town like wildfire, whispered over breakfast tables and between shopkeepers opening their stores. Sam noticed the way people's eyes followed him now, some with newfound respect, others with undisguised suspicion. A group of children playing marbles scattered as he passed, their games forgotten in their haste to clear his path. Dr. Emma Parker was just leaving her clinic as Sam walked by. She nodded to him, her usual friendly smile tinged with something new. Curiosity, perhaps, or concern. "Those men you dealt with last night," she said, falling into step beside him. "They'll live. Though one's got a broken arm that'll take months to heal properly." She studied his face carefully. Never seen breaks quite like that. Clean, precise. Almost surgical. Sam kept walking, his eyes fixed ahead, but Dr. Parker wasn't finished. "Man doesn't learn that kind of precision working cattle or mining silver, Deputy Wheeler." When he didn't respond, she sighed. "Well, whatever your past, I'm glad you're on our side." She turned off toward the general store, leaving Sam alone with his thoughts. Marshal Crawford was waiting in his office, boots propped up on his desk, a cup of coffee cooling beside a stack of wanted posters. Deputy Frank Miller lounged against the wall, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Tommy Hayes sat in the corner, unusually quiet, still processing what he'd witnessed the night before. "Shut the door, Sam," Crawford ordered, not looking up from the paper he was reading. The morning light streaming through the dusty windows cast harsh shadows across his weathered face. As Sam complied, Crawford finally raised his eyes. Got word from the county sheriff this morning. Seems our friend Victor Blackwood's been busy. 3 stage robberies in the past month, all pointing to his gang. 2 dead drivers and a passenger who made the mistake of playing hero. Sam stood quietly, hands clasped behind his back, waiting for the real reason he'd been summoned. Frank Miller's knife scraped rhythmically against his nails, the sound setting Sam's teeth on edge. Thing is, Crawford continued, dropping his boots to the floor with a thud, I've got bigger concerns than some 2-bit outlaw with delusions of grandeur. He pulled open his desk drawer and withdrew a small daguerreotype, sliding it across the desk. This here's my Clara. Teaches piano to half the children in town. Came out here from Boston 2 years ago, looking to bring some culture to our little slice of paradise. Sam picked up the image carefully. A young woman with kind eyes smiled back at him, seated at a piano in a simple but elegant dress. The photographer had captured something in her expression, a hint of sadness perhaps, or resignation, that seemed at odds with her gentle smile. Most folks don't know this. Crawford's voice softened slightly, his fingers drumming an uneven pattern on his desk. But Clara and I, well, let's say she's more than just the town's piano teacher. Been courting her these past 8 months. Lady like that, refined and educated. She could have had her pick of any man in 3 counties. Choose to give me a chance instead. His expression darkened. Thing is, I've heard rumors lately. Rumors I don't care much for. Frank Miller shifted against the wall, his knife snapping shut with an audible click. Tell him straight, Marshal. Tommy Hayes squirmed in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Crawford's face hardened as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Someone's been seeing her on the sly. A man named Michael Bennett runs the Mercantile over on Cedar Street. Respected businessman, they say. Church-going man. He spat the words like they tasted bitter. I need you to watch her, Sam. Find out if these rumors have any truth to them. Sam's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the daguerreotype, remembering similar tasks from his past, assignments that had ended in blood and grief. Sir? If the rumors are true. Crawford's voice grew colder still. If she's been making a fool of me, well, I trust you'll know what needs doing. To both of them. He paused, letting the implication sink in. We clear on that, Deputy? The weight of the badge on Sam's chest seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. He placed the daguerreotype back on the desk with careful precision, his face betraying nothing of the conflict brewing beneath his quiet exterior. Take as long as you need, Crawford added, reaching for his coffee. But I want to know everything. And Sam? His eyes grew hard as gunmetal. Don't disappoint me. Man in my position can't afford to look weak. Not with Blackwood's boys pushing boundaries and territory disputes heating up north of the creek. Later that afternoon, Sam found himself outside Clara Bennett's small house on the outskirts of town, where the neat rows of buildings gave way to scattered homesteads and open desert. A piano's melody drifted through the open windows, speaking of something gentler than the harsh reality of the frontier. The music was complex, technically perfect, but tinged with a melancholy that seemed to mirror his own troubled thoughts. He adjusted the package under his arm, a peace offering from Crawford, he'd been told, and knocked on the door. The music stopped mid-phrase, and moments later, Clara Bennett opened the door. She was even lovelier than her photograph, with auburn hair caught up in a simple bun and eyes that seemed to look right through Sam's carefully maintained facade. A silver cross hung at her throat, catching the afternoon light. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying the refined accent of an Eastern education, though something in her tone suggested she already knew why he was there. Sam cleared his throat softly. Marshal Crawford asked me to deliver this. He held out the package, watching as recognition flickered across her features, followed by something else. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. "Oh, you must be Deputy Wheeler," she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "James, Marshal Crawford, mentioned you. Please come in. I was just about to take a break from practice." The interior of Clara's home was modest but well kept, with the piano dominating the main room. Sheet music was scattered across its surface, speaking of hours of dedication. A half-empty cup of tea sat on a side table, still steaming. And beside it, Sam noticed with a practiced eye, a man's hat hastily hidden behind a potted plant. Clara unwrapped the package to reveal a delicate silver picture frame, its surface etched with intricate flower patterns. "It's beautiful," she said softly, though Sam noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as she set it aside. James is always so thoughtful. A knock at the back door made them both turn. Clara's face paled slightly. "I'm sorry, Deputy Wheeler, but I have a student arriving soon. I should prepare." Sam nodded, understanding the dismissal for what it was. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small card, the edges worn smooth from its time there. "If you need anything, Miss Bennett, day or night." She took the card, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you, Deputy. You're very kind." Her eyes met his, and in that brief moment he saw a reflection of his own trapped existence, someone else playing a role they hadn't chosen. As Sam walked away from Clara's house, he noticed movement at the back door. A man slipping inside, carrying what looked like a bouquet of wildflowers. Michael Bennett, no doubt, thinking himself unseen. The merchant walked with the confident air of a man who believed love could conquer all obstacles. Sam had seen that look before, usually right before those obstacles proved fatal. His hand instinctively moved toward his gun but stopped. For the first time since accepting Crawford's badge, he found himself questioning his loyalty to the marshal. The memory of other assignments, other lovers who had died because they dared to follow their hearts, weighed heavily on his conscience. From the window, Clara's piano music resumed, a melancholy tune that seemed to echo Sam's own troubled thoughts. He'd recognized something in her eyes, the same haunted look he saw in his own reflection each morning. The look of someone trying to escape a past, or perhaps a present, that threatened to suffocate them. Sam found a quiet spot behind the livery stable, where he could observe Clara's house without being seen. As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, he couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment would change everything. He'd come to Copper Ridge seeking anonymity, a chance to bury his violent past. Instead, he'd found himself caught between duty and conscience once again, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. The sound of Clara's piano continued to drift across the dusty street, a reminder that beauty could exist even in the harshest of places. Sam settled in for his vigil, knowing that sooner or later he would have to make a choice that would shatter the fragile peace he'd found in this frontier town. The week that followed seemed to pulse with growing tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Sam maintained his vigil over Clara's house, watching from various vantage points throughout Copper Ridge. He'd seen Michael Bennett visit 3 more times, always careful, always looking over his shoulder, but not careful enough for someone with Sam's training. The afternoon heat had driven most townspeople indoors when Deputy Frank Miller found Sam in his usual spot, behind the livery stable. Miller's spurs announced his approach long before his shadow fell across Sam's position. "Blackwood's causing trouble again," Miller drawled, lighting a cigarette with deliberate slowness. "His boys have been asking around town about you. Seems they didn't take kindly to how you handled their friends." He exhaled a stream of smoke into the dusty air. "Man called Lucas Reeves is leading them. Real nasty piece of work from what I hear." Sam remained silent, his eyes fixed on Clara's house where she was teaching a young girl at the piano. The halting notes of a beginner's practice piece drifted across the street. "Thing is," Miller continued, his voice taking on an edge, "Reeves keeps sending messages through Rose at the Silver Bell. Says he wants to meet with you. Make things right." He paused, studying Sam's impassive face. "Marshal Crawford thinks you should ignore him. Says a deputy doesn't answer to outlaws." The practice piece stumbled to a stop, followed by Clara's gentle voice encouraging her student to try again. Sam watched as a shadow passed behind the curtains. Michael Bennett arriving early again. Miller's hand dropped to his gun belt. "You listening to me, Wheeler? Or are you too busy watching the marshal's woman?" Sam finally turned, meeting Miller's gaze with quiet intensity. "Tell Reeves I'm not interested in meetings." "Yeah?" Miller's lip curled. "And when he keeps pushing? When he decides to make things personal? Then he can come find me himself." Miller's laugh held no humor. "You really are something else, Wheeler. Half the town thinks you're simple because you barely speak. Other half's starting to wonder what you're hiding beneath all that quiet." He dropped his cigarette, crushing it under his boot. "Me? I'm wondering if Crawford made a mistake giving you that badge." As Miller walked away, Sam noticed movement at Clara's window. The piano student was leaving, clutching her sheet music, while Michael Bennett slipped in through the back door. The scene was becoming familiar, too familiar. Soon he'd have to report something to Crawford, and every option before him led to bloodshed. The sun was setting when Sam finally left his post, heading toward the Silver Bell for his usual evening meal. The streets were quieter than normal, townspeople hurrying about their business with nervous energy. Word of Blackwood's interest in the quiet deputy had spread, and nobody wanted to be caught in whatever was coming. Rose Martinez was wiping down the bar when Sam entered, but something was off about her movements. Tension in her shoulders, worry in her eyes. Before she could speak, the back door burst open. Lucas Reeves strode in, flanked by 4 of Blackwood's men, all armed and wearing the sort of smiles that preceded violence. "Well, if it ain't the quiet man himself," Reeves announced, his voice carrying across the now silent saloon. He was tall, with a face scarred from countless fights and eyes that gleamed with cruel intelligence. "Been trying to talk to you proper-like, deputy. Ain't polite to keep a man waiting." Sam remained by the door, his hands loose at his sides. The few patrons in the saloon began quietly making their way to the exits. "See, Mr. Blackwood, he's a reasonable man," Reeves continued, moving closer. "Believes in solving things peacefully like when possible, but you—" He shook his head. "You disrespected his men, made him look weak. That ain't something we can let slide." "Leave," Sam said softly. "While you can." Reeves's face darkened. "Or what? You'll do that fancy fighting of yours again?" His hand dropped to his gun. "Think about fancy moves, friend. They don't mean much against a bullet." The tension stretched like a bowstring drawn too tight. Rose had backed away from the bar, her hand beneath it where Sam knew she kept a shotgun. One of Blackwood's men was nervously fingering his gun belt, while another was slowly trying to circle behind Sam. "Last chance," Sam warned, his voice barely above a whisper. Reeves's draw was fast, but Sam's reaction was faster. Before the outlaw's gun cleared leather, Sam had crossed the distance between them. His movements were fluid, economical, each strike targeting vulnerable points with surgical precision. Reeves went down hard, his unfired gun skittering across the floor. The other men drew their weapons, but Sam was already moving. He used Reeves's falling body as a shield, then launched himself at the nearest gunman. The man's shot went wide as Sam's elbow connected with his throat. The third outlaw managed to fire, the bullet grazing Sam's shoulder, before a precise strike to his knee dropped him howling. The fourth man actually got off 2 shots, splintering the bar behind Sam before finding himself disarmed and unconscious. The last of Blackwood's men turned to run, but Sam's thrown knife caught him in the shoulder, pinning him to the doorframe. The entire fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Rose emerged from behind the bar, shotgun in hand, surveying the groaning men with a mixture of awe and concern. "Sweet Jesus, Sam, what are you?" Sam was already retrieving his knife, his movements betraying no pain from his wounded shoulder. "Send for Tommy Hayes, he can help get them to jail." "Sam," Rose's voice stopped him as he turned to leave. "Blackwood won't let this stand. He can't. Not after this." Sam nodded once, then stepped out into the gathering dark. He could feel blood trickling down his arm, but the wound was minor. He'd had far worse. What troubled him more was the knowledge that this was just the beginning. Blackwood would escalate now, and Crawford would demand action. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Clara Bennett and her forbidden love, another kind of violence waiting to explode. As he walked toward Dr. Parker's clinic, Sam allowed himself a moment of grim reflection. He had come to Copper Ridge hoping to escape his past, but violence had a way of following men like him. Perhaps it was time to stop running and embrace what he truly was. Not the quiet deputy, but the weapon he'd been trained to be. The thought brought no comfort, only resignation. Behind him, the last light faded from the western sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote began to howl. Dr. Emma Parker was just about to close her clinic for the night when Sam appeared in her doorway, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. She took one look at him and wordlessly gestured toward her examination table, lighting additional oil lamps to better see her work. "Word travels fast in Copper Ridge," she said, gathering her supplies. "5 of Blackwood's men, they're saying. Though from what I hear, they'll live to regret crossing you." Her skilled fingers probed the bullet graze on his shoulder. "You're lucky. Any closer and we'd be having a very different conversation." Sam remained silent as she cleaned and bandaged the wound, but his mind was racing. He needed to get back to his surveillance of Clara's house. Michael Bennett usually stayed until sunset, and the sun was getting low. "You know," Dr. Parker continued, her voice carefully neutral as she worked, "I've treated a lot of wounds in my time. Seen every kind of injury a man can suffer out here in the territories." She paused, studying his face. "But the way you fight? I've only seen damage like that once before. After a raid by government-trained phantom fighters during the war. They called them ghost soldiers, men trained to kill with their bare hands." Sam's muscles tensed slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. Dr. Parker noticed anyway. "Marshal Crawford's got no idea what you really are, does he?" She tied off the bandage with practiced efficiency. Then again, maybe that's why he chose you. Man like that, he'd appreciate having a trained killer wearing his badge. "Are you planning to tell him?" Sam's voice was barely audible. Dr. Parker shook her head. "Not my secret to tell, but whatever you're running from, whatever brought you to our little town, just remember that violence has a way of spreading, like infection in a wound." She began cleaning her instruments. "Speaking of wounds, those men you dealt with at the Silver Bell, one of them was mighty talkative while I was patching him up. Kept muttering about Blackwood having big plans. Said something about a shipment coming in that would change everything." Sam absorbed this information silently as he stood, testing his shoulder's range of motion. He reached for his wallet, but Dr. Parker waved him off. "Consider it payment for making my job interesting," she said. "Just be careful, Sam. Town's starting to feel like a powder keg, and I think you might be the match." The sun was setting as Sam hurried toward Clara's house, cursing himself for being delayed. As he approached, he saw Michael Bennett leaving through the back door, but something was different tonight. The merchant wasn't being his usual cautious self. He was running, almost tripping over his own feet in his haste. Sam's instincts, honed by years of shadow work, screamed danger. He quickened his pace, moving silently despite his injured shoulder. As he reached Clara's back door, he heard voices inside, angry voices. One of them was Marshal Crawford's. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Crawford's voice cracked like a whip. "You think you could make a fool of me in my own town?" "James, please." Clara's voice trembled. "It's not what you think. Don't lie to me." Something crashed. Probably one of Clara's carefully arranged decorations. "I trusted you. Gave you everything you could want. And this is how you repay me?" Sam moved to the window, staying in the shadows. Through the curtains he could see Crawford looming over Clara, his face twisted with rage. His gun was drawn, though pointed at the floor for now. Clara was backed against her piano, tears streaming down her face. "I saw him running away like the coward he is," Crawford snarled. "Been seeing him for weeks, haven't you? While I was protecting this town, building something for us, you were. I never asked for any of this." Clara's voice found its strength. You never asked what I wanted, James. You just decided I was yours and expected me to play along. Crawford's gun hand twitched. You're mine, Clara. Everything in this town is mine, and nobody takes what's mine. Sam had to make a choice. His orders had been clear. If Clara was unfaithful, she and Bennett were to be dealt with. It would be easy to walk away. Let Crawford handle his own business. That's what a loyal deputy would do. But as he watched Clara stand her ground, saw the same trapped look in her eyes that he'd carried for so many years, something shifted inside him. Before he could think better of it, Sam was through the door. Marshal, his quiet voice cut through the tension like a knife. Both Crawford and Clara turned, startled by his sudden appearance. Sam? Crawford's surprise quickly turned to understanding. Ah, of course. You've been watching. You know what she's done. Good. You can help me deal with this situation properly. Clara's eyes widened in horror as she looked between them. You've been watching me? She's been unfaithful. Hasn't she, Sam? Crawford's voice hardened. Been meeting that coward Bennett behind my back, making a mockery of everything I've built. He raised his gun. Well? Report, deputy. Tell me what you've seen. Sam moved slowly, positioning himself between Crawford's gun and Clara. Put the gun away, sir. This isn't the way. Crawford's face darkened. That's not what I asked, deputy. I gave you a direct order to report on her activities. Now, do your duty. The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. Sam could feel Clara trembling behind him and could see the growing madness in Crawford's eyes. One word from him would seal their fates, either condemning them or damning himself. No, sir, Sam said softly. I won't. The look of betrayal that crossed Crawford's face would have been almost comical, if not for the gun now pointing at Sam's chest. I gave you everything, Crawford whispered. A badge, a purpose, a chance to bury whatever darkness you were running from. And this is how you repay me. Some things, Sam replied, his voice steady, are worth more than a badge. The gunshot shattered the evening quiet, but Sam was already moving. His left hand knocked Crawford's gun arm up while his right delivered a precise strike to the marshal's solar plexus. Crawford stumbled back, gasping, but managed to fire again. The bullet splintered the piano keys as Sam closed the distance. What followed was brutal and swift. Crawford was no stranger to violence, but he'd never faced anyone like Sam. In seconds, the marshal was disarmed and on his knees, blood streaming from his nose. Clara, Sam said without taking his eyes off Crawford. Run. Find Dr. Parker. Stay with her tonight. She hesitated only a moment before fleeing into the gathering darkness. Crawford watched her go, then laughed, a horrible, broken sound. You have no idea what you've done, he wheezed. No idea what's coming. Blackwood's just the beginning. He spat blood onto Clara's pristine floor. You think you can protect her? Protect anyone? When will they find out what you really are? Sam's only response was to strike once more, dropping Crawford into unconsciousness. As he stood in the ruined room, piano notes still echoing discordantly from the damaged instrument, he knew there would be no going back from this. He'd chosen his path, betrayed his badge, and now would have to face the consequences. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, cold and distant as judgment. Dawn broke over Copper Ridge like a fever, painting the sky in shades of sickly yellow and blood red. Sam hadn't slept, spending the night watching over Dr. Parker's clinic from the shadows of the abandoned blacksmith's shop across the street. His shoulder wound throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of the violence to come. Tommy Hayes found him just as the sun cleared the horizon. The young deputy's face was ashen, his usual energy replaced by nervous tension. Sam, you need to come quick. It's bad. Sam followed Tommy through the awakening town, noting how the few early risers hurried indoors at their approach. News traveled fast in Copper Ridge, and by now, everyone would know about his confrontation with Crawford. As they rounded the corner onto Cedar Street, Sam understood why Tommy had come looking for him. Michael Bennett's store had been destroyed. The windows were shattered, merchandise scattered across the dusty street. The words "traitor" had been painted across the storefront in dark red letters that looked disturbingly like blood. Inside, shelves had been overturned and the strong box behind the counter had been torn open and emptied. "Found him in the alley," Tommy said quietly, leading Sam around back. "Dr. Parker's with him now, but—" Michael Bennett lay on a makeshift stretcher, his face so badly beaten it was barely recognizable. Dr. Parker knelt beside him, her medical bag open, but largely untouched. She looked up as Sam approached, her eyes hard. "Nothing I can do," she said flatly. "Internal bleeding, broken bones. They took their time with him." Bennett's eyes fluttered open, fixing on Sam with desperate intensity. His lips moved, trying to form words through broken teeth. Sam knelt closer to hear. Clara, Bennett wheezed. Have to warn. "She's safe," Sam assured him. "At the clinic." Bennett's hand shot out, grabbing Sam's shirt with surprising strength. "No, take her. Dawn Patrol. Saw them." His grip weakened. "Blackwood's men heading north." His hand fell away as consciousness fled. Dr. Parker checked his pulse and shook her head grimly. "He's gone." Sam stood slowly, his mind racing. The north road led to Blackwood's territory, and to the abandoned silver mine that served as his base of operations. But something wasn't right. Blackwood was cruel, but he wasn't stupid. Taking Clara, killing Bennett, this felt too messy, too obvious. "Marshall Crawford's gone," Tommy added, shifting nervously. "His house is empty and Frank Miller's missing too. Half the deputies didn't show up for the morning roll call." "They're with him," Sam said softly. This was Crawford's doing, not Blackwood's. "But why?" "Because Crawford owns this town," Dr. Parker interrupted, packing away her unused medical supplies. "And Sam here just showed everyone that maybe he doesn't have as much control as he thinks. This isn't just about Clara anymore. It's about power." Sam turned to Tommy. "Get word to Rose at the Silver Bell. Tell her to spread the message. People need to stay inside today. Things are going to get worse before they get better." "What are you going to do?" Sam checked his gun, the weapon he'd avoided using since coming to Copper Ridge, preferring to handle things with his hands. But some situations required more permanent solutions. "I need weapons and information." "The Kane brothers," Dr. Parker suggested. "They supply most of the guns that move through this territory. Their ranch is about an hour's ride east." "They're not friendly to lawmen," Tommy warned. Sam unbuttoned his shirt, removing the deputy's badge he'd worn these past months. He stared at it for a moment before letting it fall into the dust. "I'm not a lawman anymore." As if to emphasize his words, more gunshots echoed from the north end of town. Sam could see smoke rising, more of Crawford's message to the townspeople about the price of defiance. "Tommy," Sam's voice was quiet but firm, "you're a good kid. Get your family and anyone else you can trust out of town. Head south to Promise City. Telegraph the territorial marshal. Tell him what's happened here. What about you? I'm going to end this." Dr. Parker stepped forward. "You can't take on Crawford and Blackwood's men alone, even with your, particular skills." "Not alone," Sam agreed. "I need to see someone first. Someone who hates Crawford as much as I do now." Understanding dawned in Dr. Parker's eyes. "Victor Blackwood. You think he'll help you?" "Number. But he might be interested in knowing that Crawford's been playing him for a fool. That shipment you mentioned, the one Blackwood's men were talking about, willing to bet Crawford's been planning to intercept it, probably been planning it for months." That's a dangerous game, Sam, Dr. Parker warned. Playing these men against each other. Sam checked his remaining ammunition. Everything's a dangerous game now, Doc. But Crawford made one mistake. He thought he could control everything. Control me. Control Clara. Control this town. He learned that some things can't be controlled. The sound of breaking glass echoed from further in town, followed by more gunshots. Crawford's message was spreading, turning Copper Ridge into a war zone. Tommy, go. Now, Doc, get somewhere safe. Sam turned to face the rising sun, its harsh light illuminating the dust and smoke that were beginning to fill the streets. Copper Ridge is about to earn its name. As Sam walked away, Dr. Parker called after him. What happened to the quiet deputy who never wanted trouble? Sam paused but didn't turn around. He died last night, in a room with a broken piano and shattered promises. He headed for the livery stable, his steps purposeful. The time for quiet was over. Crawford had forced his hand, awakening something Sam had tried to bury since coming to Copper Ridge. Now the ghost soldier would show them all why some men were better left in peace. Behind him, the town continued to burn, and somewhere to the north Clara waited for rescue. Sam just hoped she could forgive him for what he was about to become. The Kane brothers' ranch sat like a fortress on the eastern edge of the territory, a compound of weathered buildings surrounded by a high wooden wall. Sam approached on foot, leaving his horse hidden in a nearby grove. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard as he walked toward the gate, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. Two armed men watched his approach from the wall, rifles trained on his chest. That's far enough, one called out. State your business. Here to see Joe and Billy Kane, Sam replied, keeping his hands visible. About a business opportunity. The guards exchanged glances. Ain't taking new customers today. Turn around and ride out. Tell them it's about Crawford's shipment, Sam said quietly, and Blackwood's involvement. A tense moment passed before one of the guards disappeared from the wall. Minutes later, the heavy wooden gates creaked open. A burly man with a scarred face gestured for Sam to enter, first relieving him of his gun. The compound's interior was a maze of storage buildings and weapon crates. Men worked methodically, cleaning and organizing firearms of every description. Sam was led to a large barn that had been converted into an office of sorts, where the Kane brothers waited. Joe Kane was the older of the two, lean and weathered with eyes like chips of ice. Billy was younger, heavier, with a merchant's smooth hands and a gambler's calculating gaze. They sat behind a broad desk cluttered with ledgers and gun parts. Well, Joe drawled, if it ain't Crawford's quiet deputy, though word is you ain't so quiet anymore. Or a deputy. Heard what happened in town, Billy added, shuffling some papers. Quite a mess you've stirred up. Sam remained standing, studying the brothers carefully. I need weapons, rifles, revolvers, ammunition. The brothers shared an amused look. We're legitimate businessmen, Billy said, spreading his hands. We only sell to properly authorized buyers. Law enforcement, military contracts. Like the shipment you're sending to Blackwood? Sam interrupted. The one Crawford's planning to hijack. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Joe's hand moved beneath the desk, likely to be a hidden weapon. That's dangerous talk, friend. The kind that gets men killed. Crawford's been playing both sides, Sam continued, undeterred, using Blackwood's attacks as an excuse to tighten his grip on Copper Ridge while skimming profits from both your operations. The shipment's his endgame. Take the weapons, blame Blackwood's gang for any deaths, and use it as an excuse to bring in territorial forces. Billy leaned forward. And why should we believe you? Because Crawford just showed his true colors. Killed an innocent man, kidnapped a woman, and turned his deputies loose on the town. Sam's voice remained steady. Man like that, he won't stop at double-crossing Blackwood. Once he has your weapons, what's to stop him from coming after you next? The brothers exchanged another look, this one less amused. Joe spoke first. Even if what you're saying is true, why come to us? Why not go straight to Blackwood? Because I need weapons first. Can't walk into Blackwood's camp empty-handed. And after? Billy asked. What's your play here? Sam met their gaze unflinchingly. Crawford dies. Blackwood too if he stands in my way. After that, I don't care about your business arrangements. Silence filled the barn as the brothers considered his words. Finally, Joe nodded to one of the guards, who left quickly. You know, he said conversationally. We've been in this business a long time. Seen all kinds of men come through here, soldiers, outlaws, lawmen, but there's something different about you. The way you move, Billy added. The way you hold yourself. Reminds me of stories I heard during the war about special units the government trained. Men who could kill with their bare hands. Ghost soldiers, they called them. The guard returned carrying a long wooden crate, which he placed on the desk. Joe opened it slowly, revealing a pristine Winchester rifle and 2 Colt revolvers, along with several boxes of ammunition. Consider this a gesture of good faith, Joe said. But understand something. If you're playing us false, if this is some kind of trick... It's not, Sam assured them. Billy pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. Blackwood's main camp is in the old Silver Peak mine, but he's got outposts here, here, and here. He marked locations on a rough map. The shipment's due to move through Devil's Pass in 3 days. Crawford's likely to hit it there. Good ambush point. Why tell me all this? Sam asked, checking the weapons. Insurance, Joe replied with a cold smile. Crawford's been getting too big for his boots. Man like that thinking he can play everyone against each other? Bad for business. Whether you succeed or fail, you're going to upset his plans. That's worth a few guns. As Sam loaded the weapons, Billy spoke again. One more thing. Crawford's got a reputation for backup plans. Man doesn't make a move without 3 ways to win. Whatever you think you know about what's going on, guarantee there's more to it. Sam nodded, securing the rifle to his back and the revolvers in his holsters. As he turned to leave, Joe called out, Hey, ghost soldier. When you see Crawford, tell him Joe Kane sends his regards. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, burning away the morning shadows. Sam mounted his horse, the new weapons a familiar weight he'd hoped never to carry again. But Crawford had forced this, had awakened something that should have stayed buried in the past. As he rode toward Blackwood's territory, Sam reflected on the Kane brothers' warning. Crawford would have contingency plans, wheels within wheels. But Sam had spent years as a ghost, learning to dismantle men's carefully laid plans with precise violence. By the time this was over, Crawford would learn why some men were better left to their quiet lives. The horses' hooves kicked up dust as they headed north, toward the old silver mine, and whatever waited there. Behind him, Copper Ridge smoldered, and somewhere ahead, Clara's fate hung in the balance. The time for subtlety was over. The ghost soldier was going to war. The old Silver Peak mine emerged from the afternoon haze like a wound in the mountainside. Weathered timber supports framed the main entrance, while abandoned mining equipment lay scattered about like fallen soldiers. Sam counted at least 8 armed men patrolling the grounds, more than he'd expected, but fewer than he'd feared. He'd left his horse hidden in a box canyon half a mile back, approaching the mine on foot. The new Winchester rifle felt solid against his back, though he hoped to avoid using it for as long as possible. Gunfire would bring too many complications too quickly. The first guard fell silently, Sam's arm locked around his throat until consciousness fled. The second didn't even have time to turn before a precise strike to the base of his skull dropped him. Sam moved like a shadow through the camp, years of training taking over as he systematically eliminated the perimeter security. You know, a voice called out from the mine entrance. Most folks would have just asked for a meeting. Victor Snake Eyes. Blackwood emerged from the darkness, flanked by 4 armed men including Lucas Reeves, whose face still showed bruises from their encounter at the Silver Bell. Blackwood himself was shorter than Sam had expected, but his presence commanded attention. A nasty scar ran from his left eye to his jaw, giving him a perpetual sneer. Though I have to admit, Blackwood continued, I'm impressed. 6 of my men went down without a sound. That's the kind of skill a man could use in his operation. Sam stepped into view, hands away from his weapons. We need to talk. About Crawford? Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Or about how he's planning to hijack my shipment? You knew? Course I knew. Man doesn't survive in this business by being stupid. Blackwood gestured toward the mine entrance. Come on in. Let's discuss this civilized-like, though I'll need those pretty new guns you're carrying. Sam considered his options. He could probably take out Blackwood and 2 of his men before the others got a shot off, but he needed information first. Slowly, he removed the Winchester and revolvers, handing them to Reeves, who took them with obvious satisfaction. The interior of the mine opened into a large cavern that had been converted into a surprisingly comfortable living space. Lanterns cast warm light over rough-hewn furniture, while metal brackets in the walls held more rifles than Sam could quickly count. The air smelled of tobacco and gun oil. Drink, Blackwood offered, pouring himself a glass of amber liquid. No, suit yourself. Blackwood settled into a carved wooden chair. So tell me, why'd Crawford's pet deputy suddenly turn on him? Can't be just about that piano teacher of his. Sam's silence spoke volumes. Ah, Blackwood nodded. Man asked you to do something you couldn't stomach, didn't he? Wanted you to handle his woman problem personally? He laughed. Crawford always did have a possessive streak. Remember the scar he gave me? All over a business disagreement. Where is she? The girl? Not here. Blackwood sipped his drink. Crawford's got her stashed somewhere else. Probably that old mission north of town. He uses it sometimes for sensitive business. And you're just giving me this information out of kindness? Let's call it mutual interest. Blackwood set his glass down. Crawford's been playing us against each other for months, using my men's actions as an excuse to tighten his grip on the town while skimming profits from both operations. Man's gotten too big for his boots. The shipment? Oh, that's still coming through. But instead of the ambush Crawford's expecting, he's going to find himself in a real predicament. Blackwood's smile turned predatory. Question is, what's your role in all this? Sam met his gaze steadily. I'm going to kill him. Just like that? Man's got half the deputies in the territory in his pocket, connections with the territorial government, and enough dirt on important people to make him untouchable. Yes. Blackwood studied him for a long moment. You know, there's something familiar about you. Way you move, the way you handle yourself. Reminds me of stories I heard during the war about special government units. Ghost soldiers, they called them. Men trained to kill in ways that'd make the devil himself nervous. Sam remained silent. What are you, friend? One of those ghosts? Does it matter? Suppose not. Blackwood stood, walking to a map pinned to the wall. Crawford's got 20 men at least, split between the town and his other operations. More, if he calls in favors. Mission's well defended, at least 10 men on guard at any time. You seem well informed. Man in my position needs to know his enemies. Blackwood turned back to Sam. I'll make you a deal. I'll tell you exactly where to find your girl. Give you details about Crawford's security. Maybe even create a distraction to thin out his forces. In exchange, when you're done with Crawford, you leave my operation alone. Territory's big enough for everyone who's left. And the town? Copper Ridge? Once Crawford's gone, things go back to normal. I stay out, they stay out of my business. Everyone profits. Sam considered the offer. The weapons first. Blackwood nodded to Reeves, who returned Sam's guns with obvious reluctance. One more thing, Blackwood added. Crawford's got a brother in the territorial government. Real piece of work named Thomas. Probably best if he had an accident too once this is over. Save everyone some trouble down the line. You're asking a lot for information I could beat out of your men. True, but this way's cleaner. And I get to see Crawford's face when he realizes his perfect plan is falling apart. Blackwood poured another drink. Besides, way I figure it, ghost soldier like you're going to do what needs doing regardless. I'm just trying to profit from the inevitable. Sam checked his weapons before turning to leave. If your information's wrong, you'll kill me? Blackwood laughed. Son, men have been trying to kill me for 20 years, but I respect the threat. Information's good. Crawford won't be expecting you to know about the mission. Element of surprise is worth something, isn't it? As Sam reached the entrance, Blackwood called out one last time. Hey, Ghost. When you see Crawford, tell him Snake Eyes sends his regards, and that he should have finished what he started with this scar. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Sam moved through the gathering shadows, his mind already planning the assault on the mission. Blackwood was probably setting up his own double cross, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting to Clara before Crawford's madness claimed another victim. The ghost soldier had his target. Now it was just a matter of time. The old Spanish mission loomed against the starlit sky, its adobe walls gleaming pale in the moonlight. Sam watched from the cover of a dried-up creek bed as Crawford's men patrolled the grounds. Blackwood's information had been good. 10 men rotating in pairs, with another 4 likely inside. The mission's bell tower offered a perfect vantage point over the surrounding desert, making a direct approach suicide. But Sam hadn't survived this long by taking the direct approach. He'd spent the last hour observing the guards' patterns, noting how they'd grown lazy in their isolation. The 2 men watching the western wall had already drunk from a hidden bottle 3 times. The pair at the main gate were more interested in their card game than their surroundings. Only the men in the bell tower maintained proper vigilance. A coyote's howl echoed across the desert, except it wasn't a coyote. Sam recognized the signal from his war days. Blackwood was making good on his promise of a distraction. Moments later, gunfire erupted from the north, followed by shouts of alarm. Riders coming. At least 20 of them. The card players abandoned their game, rushing to reinforce the north wall. The drunk guards stumbled toward the commotion, leaving their post unmanned. Sam smiled grimly. Blackwood might be planning to double-cross him later, but for now, their interests aligned perfectly. Using the chaos as cover, Sam moved like a shadow along the western wall. The mission's old stonework offered plenty of handholds, and soon he was pulling himself onto the roof of a storage shed. From there, he had a clear view of the interior courtyard. Crawford's remaining men were focused entirely on the northern threat, none of them thinking to watch their backs. Sam dropped silently into the courtyard, staying in the deep shadows cast by the mission's walls. A quick glance through a window showed him what he needed. Clara, tied to a chair in what had once been the mission's chapel, with Deputy Frank Miller standing guard. Sam drew one of his revolvers, then thought better of it. Gunfire would draw too much attention. This would have to be handled quietly. The chapel's side door wasn't locked. Miller was facing the main entrance, his back to Sam's approach. The floorboard 3 steps in would creak. Sam remembered this from his earlier observation. He stepped over it carefully. "Took you long enough," Miller said without turning. "Crawford said you'd come." Sam froze. Miller turned slowly, his gun already drawn. "Man knows you better than you think, Wheeler. Knew you'd try something quiet instead of coming in guns blazing." He smiled coldly. "Know what else he knows? What you really are? Ghost soldier?" Clara's eyes widened at those words, darting between Sam and Miller. Sam kept his voice steady. "Put the gun down, Frank. This doesn't have to end badly. That's where you're wrong." Miller's smile grew darker. "See, Crawford's been planning this for months. Town was just the beginning. With Blackwood's weapons and his brother's connections in the territorial government, he's going to own everything from here to the state line. And you get a piece of that? Better than a peace once Crawford's brother sends in the troops to restore order. Guess who's going to be the new marshal? Miller stepped closer to Clara, pressing his gun against her temple. Only thing he needed was the right excuse, something to justify bringing in the army. Like, say, a rogue killer murdering an innocent woman before being gunned down by loyal deputies. Sam's mind raced. The North Wall gunfire had stopped. Blackwood's distraction wouldn't last much longer. You really think Crawford will let you live once this is over? Man like that doesn't share power. Maybe not. But I know for sure you won't live to see morning. Miller's finger tightened on the trigger. Drop your weapons now. Sam let his revolver fall. The sound of it hitting the wooden floor seemed to echo in the chapel's silence. Kick it away. Sam complied, the gun sliding into the shadows. You know what Crawford told me about you? Miller continued, clearly enjoying himself. Said you were the perfect weapon. Quiet, efficient, loyal to a fault, right up until you weren't. Said the army had the same problem with your kind. Couldn't quite scrub the humanity out of you completely. Will he tell you everything about my training? Enough to know you're dangerous. That's why I'm not taking any chances. Miller shifted his aim from Clara to Sam's chest. Nothing personal, you understand. Just business. You should have asked Crawford one more thing about my training. Yeah? What's that? Why did they call us ghosts? Sam moved before the words finished echoing. His hand swept up, throwing dust from the chapel floor into Miller's eyes. As the deputy fired blindly, Sam was already rolling, coming up with the knife from his boot. The blade flashed once in the moonlight. Miller's gun clattered to the floor, followed by his body. He tried to speak, but only managed a wet gurgle before going still. Sam quickly cut Clara's bonds. Can you walk? She nodded, rubbing her wrists. Sam, what he said about you. Later, Sam helped her to her feet. We need to move. Crawford will be here soon. It's too late for that, Ghost. Crawford's voice froze them both. He stood in the chapel doorway, silhouetted by torchlight, his gun trained steadily on them. Behind him, Sam could see more men arriving, not Crawford's deputies, but soldiers in territorial army uniforms. I have to admit, Crawford continued, you played your part perfectly. The quiet deputy, the reluctant killer trying to go straight, almost had me fooled. He stepped into the chapel. But men like us, we don't change. We just find new wars to fight. Sam pushed Clara behind him, his mind already calculating angles, distances, chances. Not good. The thing is, Crawford smiled, I should thank you. Once word gets out about how a dangerous government killer went rogue, murdered an innocent woman, and had to be put down by the territorial army, well, let's just say my brother's going to have all the justification he needs to implement some changes around here. Outside, more soldiers were arriving. Sam could hear horses, orders being shouted, the metallic sound of weapons being readied. The ghost soldier was trapped, and dawn was still hours away. The chapel's silence hung heavy as a hangman's rope. Sam stood motionless, Clara behind him, while Crawford's smile grew colder. Through the windows, torchlight cast shifting shadows as territorial soldiers took up positions around the mission. You know what your problem is, Ghost? Crawford stepped closer, his gun unwavering. You think you're still human? That you can walk away from what they made you? Play at being normal? He gestured at Clara with his free hand. Find yourself a nice woman, settle down, forget about all the blood on your hands. Like you forgot? Sam's voice was soft. All those people you've killed, building your little empire? I never pretended to be anything but what I am. Crawford's eyes hardened. The army may have trained you, but I earned my reputation the hard way. Every body, every betrayal, every step up the ladder, I owned it all. Yet you still need your brother's soldiers to handle one man. Crawford laughed. Insurance, Ghost. Always have a backup plan. Speaking of which, he raised his voice. Lieutenant, Status report. A young officer appeared in the doorway, saluting crisply. Perimeter secured, sir. Blackwood's men have withdrawn to the north. We found 4 bodies in the courtyard. It looks like your rogue killer's work. Excellent. Crawford nodded. Make sure your men are clear on the story. Dangerous fugitive, a highly trained killer, had to be put down before he could murder an innocent woman. The newspapers will love it. And the woman, sir? Crawford's smile turned predatory. Sadly, we weren't quite fast enough to save her. Tragic. Clara's hand gripped Sam's arm. James, please. This isn't you. The man I knew. The man you knew was a mask. Crawford cut her off. A convenient fiction to keep the town calm while I built something real. But now? He gestured at the soldiers outside. Now I don't need masks anymore. By this time tomorrow I'll control everything from here to Threely, but her death will ensure the territorial government has the justification it needs to implement martial law. Can't have dangerous killers running loose in our communities, after all. State line, and you two will be convenient martyrs to the cause of progress. Sam's mind raced, evaluating options. The knife he'd used on Miller was still in his hand, hidden behind his leg. 3 territorial soldiers visible through the windows, plus the lieutenant. Crawford, 8 feet away, gun-trained center mass. Bad odds, but he'd faced worse. One thing I don't understand, Sam said, slowly shifting his weight. Why tell us all this? Why not just shoot us and be done? Professional courtesy, I suppose. Crawford shrugged. One killer to another. Besides, I wanted you to understand. Everything you tried to build here, all your attempts at redemption, they were doomed from the start. Men like us don't get second chances. You're right about that. The words had barely left Sam's mouth when several things happened at once. A massive explosion rocked the north wall, sending soldiers scrambling for cover. In the chaos, Sam moved with inhuman speed, pushing Clara toward the relative safety of the heavy wooden pews, while throwing his knife in one fluid motion. Crawford managed to fire the bullet grazing Sam's shoulder, but the knife found its mark in the lieutenant's throat. As the officer fell, Sam was already rolling, coming up with Miller's dropped revolver. 2 more shots rang out, one from Crawford, splintering the pew where Sam's head had been, and one from Sam, catching Crawford in his gun arm. Ghost! Blackwood's voice carried over the chaos outside. Now would be a good time to wrap this up. Crawford staggered but kept his grip on his gun, switching to his left hand. You actually trusted that snake? He laughed through the pain. Man's been trying to take over this territory for years. Didn't trust him, Sam replied, keeping the pew between them. Just gave him what he wanted, an excuse to move against you openly. More explosions rocked the mission as Blackwood's men engaged the territorial soldiers. Crawford's carefully laid plans were unraveling, and his face showed it. Doesn't matter. My brother won't be a problem. Sam's voice was cold. The Kane brothers are paying him a visit tonight. Seems they don't appreciate being played for fools either. Crawford's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You manipulated all of them, Blackwood, the Kanes. Turned my own allies against me. How you taught me well, Marshal. Sam stood, Miller's revolver aimed steady. Always have a backup plan? Sam. Clara's warning came just as one of Crawford's surviving deputies burst through the side door, gun raised. Sam dove as both men fired. The deputy's shot went wide, but Sam's found its mark. The man was dead before he hit the floor. Crawford used the distraction to run, disappearing through the chapel's back door. Sam moved to follow, but Clara caught his arm. Let him go, she pleaded. We can just leave. Get away from all this. Sam gently removed her hand. Can't do that. Man like Crawford, he'll never stop coming. Never stop hurting people. Then I'm coming with you. No. Sam checked Miller's revolver. 2 shots left. Get to the stables. Blackwood's men will let you through. Head south to Promise City. Tommy Hayes and Dr. Parker will look after you. Sam, her voice caught. What they made you, what you are. It doesn't matter to me. He allowed himself one moment of softness, touching her cheek gently. "That's why I have to end this. So men like Crawford can't use people like you to play their games anymore." Outside, the battle raged between Blackwood's gang and the territorial soldiers. Sam moved through the chaos like the ghost he was, following Crawford's trail of blood toward the mission's bell tower. It would end where it began, with violence and death in the dark. Behind him, Clara's quiet sobs were swallowed by the sound of gunfire and the desert wind. The ancient stone steps of the mission's bell tower spiraled upward into darkness, each one marked by Crawford's blood. Sam moved silently, Miller's revolver ready, every sense alert for ambush. Above, the great bronze bell hung silent, a darker shadow against the night sky. The battle below had shifted. Blackwood's men had drawn most of the territorial soldiers away from the mission, their gunfight echoing across the desert. But Sam knew better than to think Crawford was finished. Men like him always saved something for last. The top of the tower opened onto a narrow platform surrounded by stone arches. Crawford stood with his back to the bell, his wounded arm held tight against his chest, his left hand gripping his revolver. Blood had soaked through his shirt, but his eyes burned with familiar intensity. "You know what's funny?" Crawford's laugh was harsh in the thin air. "All those months watching you play the quiet deputy, I knew something wasn't quite right. Man with your training doesn't just walk away from what he is." "Maybe I wanted to try." "Try what, being normal?" Crawford spat blood. "Look around you, Ghost. Look what happened to everyone who trusted you. The town's probably burning by now. Blackwood's men and my brother's soldiers killing each other in the streets, and poor, sweet Clara." His smile turned cruel. "Well, she learned the hard way what happens when you trust a killer." Sam stepped onto the platform, keeping the bell between them. "This ends tonight, Crawford." "Does it? You really think killing me changes anything?" Crawford gestured toward the distant lights of Copper Ridge. "Territory's changing, Ghost. Men like us, we're just the beginning. Soon there'll be more soldiers, more laws, more men in suits deciding who lives and who dies. Progress, they call it. You're stalling. Maybe." Crawford's smile widened. "Or maybe I'm just wondering if you checked how many shots you had left in Miller's gun." Sam's finger tightened on the trigger. 1 shot left. He'd kept count through habit. But Crawford couldn't know that. "See, that's the difference between us," Crawford continued. "You rely on your training, your instincts. Me, I plan. Like having my men replace half the ammunition in the garrison with duds before this started, or making sure Miller's gun was 2 shots short of full when he took his post." The implications hit Sam just as Crawford raised his own weapon. "You always were a good student of human nature, Ghost. Knew you'd go for the fallen gun instead of risking a throw with your knife. Yet here we are." Sam kept his aim steady. 1 shot each. "True, but I've got one more lesson to teach you." Crawford's grin turned feral. "About backup plans." The hidden door in the platform floor burst open behind Sam. He spun, firing his last shot instinctively. The territorial soldier who'd been waiting below died instantly, but the distraction was all Crawford needed. His bullet took Sam high in the back, sending him staggering against the stone railing. "See?" Crawford approached slowly, savoring the moment. "That's why you failed. All that skill, all that training, but you never learned to think ahead, to plan for every contingency." Sam tried to straighten, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The stone felt cold against his back as he slid down, leaving a trail of blood on the ancient rocks. "I have to admit," Crawford continued, "you surprised me with Blackwood and the Canes. Didn't think you had that kind of manipulation in you. But in the end," he pressed his gun to Sam's forehead. "In the end, the ghost is just another dead man." "You're right." Sam's voice was barely a whisper. "About planning ahead." Crawford's eyes widened as he felt the knife press against his ribs, the same knife Sam had retrieved from the dead lieutenant's throat during the chaos below. In the excitement of his victory, Crawford had forgotten the most important lesson. Always search a dead man for weapons. That's not possible, Crawford gasped as the blade slid home. You're shot. Yes. Sam pushed the knife deeper. But ghost soldiers learn to work through pain. To finish the mission no matter the cost. Crawford tried to bring his gun around, but his wounded arm betrayed him. The weapon clattered to the platform as he stumbled backward, hitting the bell with a dull boom that echoed across the desert. You can't... Blood bubbled from Crawford's lips. My brother is already dead. Sam forced himself to stand, though every movement was agony. The Kane brothers sent their regards. Crawford slumped against the bell, leaving a crimson smear on the ancient bronze. His eyes held something Sam had never seen there before. Fear. What are you? Just a ghost. Sam's second knife, the one from his boot, flashed once in the starlight, putting another monster to rest. The bell tolled once more as Crawford's body fell against it, then slid lifeless to the platform. Below, the sounds of battle were fading as dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Sam stumbled to the railing, his vision growing dark at the edges. He could see riders moving away from the mission, Blackwood's men withdrawing now that their part was played. In the distance, Copper Ridge stood peaceful, unaware that its future had just been decided in blood and shadow. The ghost soldier's last mission was complete, but as Sam's legs finally gave out and the stone rushed up to meet him, his thoughts weren't of violence or revenge. Instead, he remembered Clara's music drifting through the evening air, the one moment of peace he'd found in all his years of darkness. The mission bell rang one final time, marking the end of a killer's reign and a ghost's attempt at redemption. As consciousness faded, Sam smiled. Perhaps some ghosts could find peace after all. Then the darkness took him, and the desert wind carried away the last echoes of the bell's mournful song. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Dr. Emma Parker found Sam's body on the bell tower platform. He lay in a pool of dried blood beside Crawford's corpse, his hand still gripping the knife that had ended the marshal's reign. To her surprise, he was still breathing. Barely. I need help up here, she shouted down to Tommy Hayes, who had accompanied her to the mission. He's alive! The next few hours passed in a blur of desperate medical work. Dr. Parker had seen her share of bullet wounds during her years in Copper Ridge, but Sam's injuries went beyond anything in her experience. In addition to Crawford's shot, he had 2 other bullet wounds she hadn't known about, plus dozens of older scars that told their own stories of violence. Ghost soldiers, she muttered as she worked, remembering the stories from the war. They really did make you hard to kill. Tommy paced nervously nearby, his young face pale with worry. Doc, riders coming from town, looks like Rose Martinez and some others. Good. I need more supplies. She pressed another bandage against Sam's wounds. Go down and fill them in, and Tommy, check on Clara. She shouldn't be alone after what happened. As Tommy hurried away, Dr. Parker noticed Sam's eyes flickering open. Stay still, she ordered. You've lost enough blood to kill 3 men. Crawford? His voice was barely a whisper. Dead. Along with his brother, from what I hear. The Kane brothers were very thorough. She began cleaning another wound. Blackwood's men withdrew north at dawn. Territorial soldiers either fled or surrendered when they realized their commander was dead. Town's quiet now. Sam tried to move but couldn't. Clara? Safe. Tommy Hayes got her to Promise City last night, just like you asked, though I expect she'll be back once she hears you survived. Dr. Parker's voice softened. You did it, Sam. Crawford's empire is finished. A ghost of a smile crossed his pale lips. Not just Crawford. Ah. You mean Blackwood? She nodded understandingly. Clever of you, using him against Crawford, but men like that won't stop. Sam's eyes closed again. Territory's changing, like Crawford said. That's tomorrow's problem. Dr. Parker heard horses in the courtyard below, Rose arriving with supplies. For now, you need to rest. But Sam was already unconscious again, his breathing shallow but steady. Dr. Parker studied his face, noting how even in unconsciousness he maintained that look of quiet readiness. Some habits, it seemed, couldn't be trained away. Rose Martinez burst into the room carrying medical supplies. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and her eyes widened at the sight of blood. Mary, Mother of God! He's alive! Barely. Dr. Parker accepted the supplies gratefully. What's happening in town? Chaos. Rose set down more bandages. Crawford's remaining men either fled or turned themselves in. But that's not the strange part. She lowered her voice. Riders came in from the north an hour ago. Said they found Blackwood's camp at the old silver mine. Everyone is dead. Dr. Parker's hands still. Everyone? Shot clean through the head. Every one of them, including Blackwood himself. Rose crossed herself. Professional work, they said, like something from the war. The Kane brothers? Number they were seen heading east with their men. This was someone else. Rose glanced at Sam's unconscious form. You don't think... He was here all night, Dr. Parker said firmly. Focus on what matters. Crawford's dead, the territory's free of both gangs, and the town survived. Rose nodded, but her expression remained troubled. There's more. Territorial governor's representative is riding in from Promise City. Wants to establish proper law enforcement now that Crawford and his brother are gone. And he's asking for Sam. Rose wrung her hands nervously. By name. Says he knows what Sam really is, what he was during the war. I want to offer him a position. Dr. Parker laughed softly. Man's got terrible timing. Sam's in no condition to meet anyone for at least a week. That's just it. Rose lowered her voice further. The representative, he said he expected that. Said to tell Sam that ghosts always find their way home. Mean anything to you? Before Dr. Parker could respond, Sam's hand shot out, gripping Rose's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were open again, filled with a clarity that belied his wounds. Tell him no, Sam whispered. But no more ghosts. His grip relaxed. Time to rest. Rose nodded uncertainty and hurried from the room. Dr. Parker continued her work in silence, but her mind was racing. The dead men at Blackwood's camp, the territorial representative's cryptic message, Sam's reaction, pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. The morning wore on as she tended to Sam's wounds. Tommy Hayes returned with news that Clara was already on her way back from Promise City, having refused to stay away once she heard Sam was alive. The town was beginning to stir, people emerging to assess the damage and begin rebuilding. Yet even as life returned to normal, Dr. Parker couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. Crawford's death had left a vacuum, one that nature and men abhorred. Sam might have won this battle, but she suspected the war was far from over. Outside the mission's walls, a hot wind stirred the desert dust. Vultures circled lazily over the north road, where Blackwood's men lay cooling in their mines. And somewhere, in the shadowy halls of territorial power, other men were already making plans. Sam stirred again, his fever rising. In his delirium, he mumbled about ghosts and bells, about duty and redemption. Dr. Parker wiped his brow and wondered what kind of peace a man like him could ever truly find. The mission bell tolled once more, moved by the desert wind, its bronze voice carrying across the empty land. Like the ghost soldier below, it spoke of violence and victory, of endings and beginnings. But mostly it spoke of secrets yet to come. A week passed before Sam could stand without help. Dr. Parker had moved him from the mission to her clinic in town, where Clara spent every day by his bedside. She would play the small piano in the clinic's waiting room, the gentle music drifting through the building like a healing breeze. The territorial governor's representative had come and gone, leaving behind a sealed letter that Sam hadn't opened. It sat on his bedside table, a reminder of the past he'd tried to leave behind. Tommy Hayes reported that more government men had arrived in town, asking questions about Crawford's death and the massacre at Blackwood's camp. They're calling you a hero in some quarters, Dr. Parker told him one evening as she changed his bandages. The quiet deputy who exposed corruption and saved the town. Sam said nothing, his eyes fixed on the desert visible through the clinic window. The sunset painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, while dust devils danced across the empty street. Others are telling different stories, she continued, about ghost soldiers and government secrets, about how Blackwood's entire gang was eliminated with military precision the same night Crawford died. She tied off a bandage. Want to tell me about that? No. She nodded, understanding. The territorial marshal arrived this morning. Says the governor's offering you a full pardon for any past activities. Plus a badge if you want it. Town needs a new marshal, after all. Sam's silence spoke volumes. Didn't think so. She gathered her supplies. Clara's waiting outside. Should I send her in? He nodded once, and moments later Clara entered. She looked better than she had a week ago, though shadows still lingered in her eyes. The events at the mission had left their mark on everyone. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said, without preamble. Taking the stage to San Francisco. My sister lives there. She's been asking me to join her for years. Sam watched a hawk circle in the darkening sky. You could come with me, Clara continued softly. Leave all this behind. Start fresh where no one knows about what you were. What I am, Sam corrected quietly. What you choose to be. She took his hand. The music you heard that day in my house, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. You smiled then. Really smiled. That man, the one who found peace in music, that's who you could be. Sam finally turned to meet her gaze. Could I? Yes. She squeezed his hand. But you won't. Will you? He looked back to the window. The hawk had disappeared, but in the distance, riders were approaching town. More government men, probably, coming to untangle the web of violence and secrets Crawford's death had exposed. They'll never stop coming, he said softly. Men like Crawford, like Blackwood. The territory's changing, like they said, becoming something new. And you think you have to stop them? There was no accusation in her voice, only understanding. Someone has to stand in the shadows, keep the peace that good people build. Clara stood, straightening her dress. The stage leaves at noon. If you change your mind... She leaned down and kissed his cheek gently. Thank you, Sam, for everything. After she left, Sam reached for the sealed letter on his bedside table. The government seal cracked easily, revealing orders he'd known would come. More corruption to fight, more secrets to bury, more ghosts to create. The territory was vast, and shadows were spreading. The next day, he watched from Dr. Parker's window as Clara's stage disappeared into the desert haze. She hadn't looked back, and he was glad. Better to remember her as she had been, playing piano in a sunlit room, offering a ghost a glimpse of peace. Tommy Hayes brought his horse around sunset. The young deputy had grown in the past weeks, hardened by what he'd seen but not broken by it. He'd make a good lawman someday. Sure you won't stay? Tommy asked as Sam checked his saddlebags. Town needs men like you. No, Sam replied. It needs men like you. Men who still believe in the light. Dr. Parker emerged from her clinic, holding a package. Medicines, she explained, handing it to him. And something else you might need. Sam opened the package slightly, revealing a familiar badge. Not Crawford's, but a new one. Understanding dawned as he recognized the territorial marshal's star. Your choice, Dr. Parker said quietly. But sometimes a badge is useful, even for a ghost. Sam mounted carefully, his wound still healing. The badge went into his saddlebag, neither accepted nor rejected. The future would decide its purpose. Where will you go? Tommy asked. North. Sam adjusted his hat against the setting sun. There's trouble brewing in the high country. Men disappearing, gold shipments being robbed. Territory needs watching. And the government men? Will find what they expect to find. Sam gathered his reins. Ghost stories and empty graves. Dr. Parker stepped forward. The territorial representative. He said others like you might come. Other ghosts looking to settle scores. Let them come. Sam's voice carried the weight of certainty. I'll be waiting. With a touch of his spurs, Sam Wheeler, the quiet deputy, the ghost soldier, the man who had dared to dream of peace, rode north into the gathering dark. Behind him, Copper Ridge's lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars, while ahead, the endless desert waited with its secrets and shadows. The mission bell tolled once more, perhaps moved by the wind, perhaps marking the passage of another soul seeking redemption. Its bronze voice echoed across the empty land, speaking of violence and mercy, of duty and choice, of ghosts who walked in daylight and men who lived in shadow. But mostly, it spoke of a truth Sam had finally accepted. Some men weren't meant for peace. They were meant to guard it from the darkness, to stand eternal watch so others could live in the light. The ghost soldier rode on, leaving only footprints in the desert dust. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new shadows to fight. But for now, in the space between sunset and starlight, he allowed himself to remember the sound of piano music and the brief, sweet taste of what might have been. Then, the darkness swallowed him and only the wind remained to mark his passing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.